Marvel took a step back in 2024 when it comes to comic book movies, even though it doesn't look like they did, because there's actually several Marvel comic book characters on this list. But really, the MCU only did one, and it's really the only really good movie on this list, Deadpool and Wolverine, which, as much as I love that movie, it's honestly not the greatest film ever made. It's just a fun movie. I mean, it's literally just two dudes driving through a wasteland. That's most of the movie. I still love the movie, despite all of its flaws, and that's mostly because of Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds just making the movie pretty much a fun nonsense-driven film. It's full of nonsense, but it's like a guilty pleasure. I love that movie. Venom: The Last Dance, it's okay. I didn't hate that movie. I actually had some fun watching it, but is it a perfect movie? Oh, no. No, you could argue that it's pretty awful, but I did enjoy that movie. Doesn't change the fact that it doesn't need to exist. The Crow, awful. Joker, awful. Kraven, didn't see, but I don't think I need to. Sounds pretty awful from what I've heard about it. And Madam Web, a movie so bad, it might kind of end up becoming a cult classic because, I mean, I laughed a lot in that movie, and I don't think it was intentional. It's like the Pepsi machine that falls on Ezekiel. It's pretty damn funny. That's what killed him, if you haven't seen it. A Pepsi machine falls on him. It's so awful. Awful movies all around here, except for Deadpool and Wolverine. And Venom: The Last Dance, I want to kind of pull out of that rotten. I think it is at least a 50%, in my opinion. It's not that bad. But, you know, I would happily erase it to get a proper Venom, like as a villain in a Spider-Man movie where he belongs. Could you imagine if we had a Spider-Man movie where he gets the black suit? You'd have to do it in two parts, because you need him to have the black suit and then kind of realize towards the end of the movie that it's bad, and then him breaking away from it. And then you end it with the actual birth of Venom. You know, you have him, they did it in Spider-Man 3, the original with Tobey. He's in the church, the bell makes it come off of him, and then it slides down to Eddie Brock. And then you have Venom be the villain of the next movie. That's perfect. That's how you're supposed to do it. But, you know, if you do that and then you want to spin him off into a movie, that's how you do it. But, you know, Sony's gonna Sony when it comes to these characters. All these movies, other than Deadpool and Wolverine, I think Venom made some money, but for the most part, you know, I don't know how much of that they consider a success. The rest of them bombed completely. Well, Sony Pictures CEO, Tony here, he's not happy. He actually blames the press for those movies failing and defends them. He's stepping down, actually. This is like, I think they said January 2nd, he steps down, and this other guy's going to take over as Sony Pictures CEO. I can't find the date offhand, but I'm pretty sure it's like January, early January. So this is interesting. I saw this originally posted on X. Sony Pictures CEO says the press is to blame for Madam Web not performing well. Well, that's interesting. I don't think anybody could have saved that movie because it's a giant piece of shit. This movie is I almost said effing. Can't say it too early in the video because, well, they'll demonetize it. But this is not a good movie. It's an awful movie. It should have never been made. Giant waste of money. Same with Kraven. But he's blaming the press, taking a victim approach, which is pretty bold, especially in 2024. Oh, yeah. Surprisingly, he didn't blame the audiences. He stuck it to the journalists. The journalists, the press ruined this movie. I'm sorry, but I actually agree with pretty much all of these Rotten Tomatoes scores. I think they've actually got him right. I think Wolverine, Wolverine and Deadpool, a 7 or 8 out of 10. Yeah, sure, 7 out of 10. I could give that. I could give that to him. That's fine. A 4 out of 10 if we go by that metric. For Venom, a little low, but whatever. Joker, a 3 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 10. Yeah, sure. All these movies down here are awful. I actually agree with them. But you should be blaming yourself for making shitty movies without Spider-Man. Spider-Man, none of these characters work without Spider-Man. And that was never going to change. The only reason Sony's doing it is because they want to try to get some of that Marvel money, and they thought that they could make a Spider-Man MCU-style universe. And I'm sorry, but it just was never going to happen. It was never going to happen. But here's the actual quote. Going back to Kraven the Hunter, and Sony had Madam Web earlier this year, which also underperformed. Now, this was a follow-up question to the performance of the film studio. So Sony Pictures, and he's ahead of a lot of just pictures, by the way. This is also PlayStation, music, all of the entertainment is under one brand at Sony. So he's the head of a lot of shit there. And he says, a lot of this is about just every other movie in there because they talk about the coup and the strikes and stuff like that. They say, yeah, we've had mostly very, very good results. Unfortunately, Kraven the Hunter that we launched last weekend, and it was his last film launch, by the way, because he steps down early January. Probably the worst launch we've had in the past 7.5 years. So that didn't work out very well, which I still don't understand because the film is not a bad film. Yeah, it likely is. Now, I haven't seen Kraven, so I don't want to get on a soapbox and tell you why it's a shitty film. I've heard from enough people that I trust that it's a piece of shit. I don't like these Spider-Man spinoffs, which, by the way, the only reason these even exist at all is to retain the Spider-Man rights because they have to do live-action Spider-Man stuff to keep the license from Marvel. Going back to the Kraven the Hunter question, going back to Kraven the Hunter, and Sony had Madam Web earlier this year, which also underperformed. So, weird way to phrase that question. Let's just touch on Madam Web for a moment. Madam Web underperformed in the theaters because the press just crucified it. Was not a bad film, and it did great for Netflix. For some reason, the press decided that they didn't want us making these movies out of Kraven and Madam Web. The critics just destroyed them. They also did it with Venom, but the audience loved Venom and made Venom a massive hit. These are not terrible films. They were just destroyed by the critics in the press for some reason. Now, let's unpack this a little bit. First off, the audience didn't just absolutely love Venom. The movie didn't make that much money. It made just enough. It wasn't a massive hit, which is what he calls it, a massive hit. It made a little bit of money. Deadpool and Wolverine is a massive hit. Venom squeaked by. Sorry. That movie doesn't even touch Deadpool and Wolverine. And then Kraven and Madam Web, awful movies. They are bad, especially Madam Web. Madam Web's probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It is absolutely a terrible film. It is straight up trash. It's so bad that in some ways it becomes good, like The Room. It's a very, very stupid movie. And what makes Madam Web entertaining is that it's easy to mock and make fun of because it's so bad. That's why it's fun, because it's fun to make fun of. Kraven, I'm not sure if it's so bad it's fun to make fun of. I think it's just a bad movie in general. Maybe it's fine. I'll leave that up to you to decide. I don't care. I just don't like these movies. I would rather you save these characters and use them where they belong as villains in Spider-Man movies. That's why a lot of these characters have not been used as villains in Spider-Man movies, because they want to save them for their little solo projects, which nobody's interested in. The ultimate goal here was to build them up and do a Sinister Six movie, which, I mean, the Sinister Six exists to kill Spider-Man, not to turn into some kind of Suicide Squad ripoff, which is what they would have done with them. That was absolutely the goal, is to make a Suicide Squad movie out of the Sinister Six and try to make that work. But nobody wants that. I would love to see the Sinister Six as the villains in a Spider-Man movie. We almost got that with No Way Home. It's like the Sinister Five. We were really close to getting that. There were a lot of rumors that Venom was in it. That would have worked. I would prefer the actual original lineup for a Sinister Six, but you know, I don't know what they're going to do here. But that was always the goal. Now, if you did a Sinister Six movie, you know, with them as the villains and Spider-Man struggling to beat them, that would be a pretty good movie. A lot of Sinister Six stuff is really good. There's some really good storylines with them in the comics, but their Suicide Squad version, nobody would care. Just wouldn't work. These characters have never, other than Venom, never been really very successful as independent comic books throughout the history of, because they've tried. Morbius has had his own comics and shit. Nobody ever picks him up. Morbius just isn't that interesting by himself. Another movie that was almost so bad it's kind of good. There's some funny shit in Kraven. And at least in Morbius, at least Morbius had those memes. They're really funny memes, like it's Morbin time and people putting him over like fake box office numbers. That shit was funny. But yeah, this victim approach, not a good look, man. Not a good look. They say they're rethinking their Spider-Man stuff because he says he's not going to give up. But that's up to the new CEO to decide, isn't it? I do not think we need to rethink it just because it's snake bitten. I do think we need to rethink it just because it's snake bitten. If we put another one out, it's going to get destroyed no matter how good or bad it is. No, if you put one out that was good, people would show up. Venom 3 was okay. It's a good movie. I liked Venom 3, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't. People showed up for it. And, you know, blaming the critics because they're saying, oh, the critics trashed it. That's why no one showed up. But I'm sorry, that's not the way it works anymore. In fact, people really kind of disregard critics. If anything, they pay attention to what people on YouTube say or stuff like that. No one really listens to mainstream critics anymore. Mainstream critics have praised plenty of movies that have tanked. And then they blame people for not showing up. Nobody listens to them anymore, which is why this is kind of stupid. Just because critics trashed it doesn't mean anything. So, you know, he plays selective games here with this, too. Critics hated Venom 3. It made money. Critics hated Deadpool and Wolverine. I know it says 78 there, but there were a lot of critics that trashed that movie hard. They really trashed it. And there was a lot of, like, that's mostly, like, a lot of smaller sites that came in and gave that a good review. A lot of the top critics hated Deadpool and Wolverine. That didn't matter. Nobody listened to them. I'm surprised the critics hated Joker 2. I was surprised that lined up. That's not a Warner movie, by the way. Neither is The Crow. But if anything, a lot of people would think that these movies are good because the critic scores are so low. That's what it's kind of become. It's almost a meme at this point. So, like, what are you doing, man? Nobody cares about what the critics have to say anymore. Critics have lost a lot of power. They used to have a lot to say, but in the age of social media, people listen to influencers they like. They don't really give a shit about what critics have to say anymore. That's why you see a lot of them spurg out, especially in the video game side of things. They really go insane when people don't like their reviews. But anyway, I just thought this was funny. A lot of people in the comments of these posts, too, like really just roasting this guy's takes. Like, nah, Madam Web wasn't a good movie. You had a cool premise, literally Madam Web and all the Spider-Girls, but yet they fumbled it. Yeah, it's true. It's Cindy Sweeney in this movie, and like covered her up. They tried their best to make her like average, mediocre look. Like, why wouldn't you have her like in a tank top and a short skirt for the whole movie? Because they were never in their costumes. Only in like dream sequences were they ever in a costume. Like, what a fumble. They really did screw that up big time. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think about all of this. And by the way, like she would totally embrace being in a tank top and a short skirt. This is what's cool about Cindy Sweeney. Yeah, let's get sexy. But they're like, nah, let's put you in like baggy clothes. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments. Also, if you would, please like, subscribe, share the video. Make sure you're still subscribed. Hit that notification bell. And we'll see you on the next one. Peace.